We're back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. We are on the Plus. We're also streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com, talking about our I-team here at News Channel 5's continuing investigation broken into juvenile justice, juvenile crime. And the way they've been locked up is what we're talking about today with News Channel 5's Ben Hall and Wesley Clark, attorney who worked with him on this story. So you have sued the state, or DCS, because of kids in solitary confinement. We're talking kids as young as 12 years old, locked
12
up
to 19 go to this facility. Yeah, so
in a room for
19.
up to 23
That's
hours
what happens,
a day.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to show a clip. It's ready to go, but you want to tell folks what this is about?
So this just kind of sets things up, and we aired it on the morning show this morning, and I wish it were longer. What we're going to air tonight is 5 minutes, and then we have a 12-minute documentary that's going to be released on Roku and Amazon Fire and all of that.
We want to push that a lot.
Yeah,
there's a lot more on those.
But this sets it up, and this lets you know that it's Davidson County. These are experts who are very concerned by what they're seeing and are speaking out. It's, I think, highly unusual to see Davidson County juvenile court officials say, wait a minute, we have a serious problem here. We're going to speak out against state policy.
All right.
And so that's what we're starting with.
Let's have a look at that.
This haunting picture shows a child locked alone inside a cell at the Middle Tennessee Juvenile Detention Center in Murray County. We don't know the child's name, but it was taken last month.
They have solitary confinement policies. They force children to be in their cells for sometimes 23 hours at a time in solitary confinement for no reason.
Davidson County's juvenile court administrator, Kathy Sinbeck, says what's happening inside the Middle Tennessee Juvenile Detention Center is solitary confinement, and it represents much of what is broken about Tennessee's juvenile justice system.
During his time at Murray County, he went into a deep, dark depression.
Davidson County Juvenile Probation Officer Kelly Gray was so disturbed by what a 16-year-old boy told her about his time inside the facility earlier this year that she took detailed notes about what he said.
I walked out of the interview that day and I sat in my car and cried because I played a hand in that. And it shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening to our youth.
All right, that's what you said, Ben. What's interesting here is we have Metro officials calling out the state for something they don't think is appropriate.
So she took detailed notes. It is. I think it's fairly remarkable. And I'm just going to read some of what the detailed notes said. The teenager, the 16-year-old, started out 24 hours in the cell and did that for 7 straight days. All he was allowed to do was take a shower in the morning. He said he didn't know why he could not leave his cell. He said you have to sweep your cell every morning, and if you don't, then you are not allowed to leave. He said no one ever told him that, and there was never anything to sweep because nothing was allowed in your cell.
And he's 16 years old.
Right.
And I can tell you that if a foster parent were to do this to a child that came into their custody, they would be charged with child abuse.
Right, that's a great point. Like if they just locked them in the bedroom and never let them out. And we've done stories on this where some foster parents have been busted for that.
Right.
And that's a crime. And yet they do that there. Now, all right, we have some viewers like on Facebook saying, look, I care about people who these juveniles have killed, like Kyle Yorletz or Officer Anderson, people like this. And there's the frustration there about this. And it's like, well, to heck with these kids. I want to know whether or not, I mean, not all of them that are in solitary committed these very serious crimes, right? I mean, look, if they're accused of murder, even I don't know how bad I feel about them being locked up if they're a danger to other kids.
All juveniles are not accused of murder.
Right. So are some of these kids in here for what, shoplifting, car theft? What are they in there for?
Repeated runaways can be sent to department custody. It can range from repeated minor offenses to very serious felony offenses.
So it's a broad range.
Right.
And they're all treated the same.
Once they get into a facility, the policies of the facility are what dictate whether or not they end up in solitary confinement, not the circumstances of their offense. So,
okay. In your mind, could there be any circumstance whereby a juvenile should be in solitary?
Sure, and that includes where there is a biological contamination, where it is necessary to protect the safety of that child and other children,
like they're sick. Okay.
And for only the amount of time necessary to protect that child or other children in a safety context. So that is appropriate. That is an appropriate use of isolation by any standard. But this prolonged use of solitary confinement without any of those justifications is very likely unconstitutional.
And there are children that are in there that are charged with very serious things, and that facility has a very difficult job. But does it make things worse instead of better to keep children isolated and in a single cell for that period of time?
And I think that's what we need to hit on a little more, Ben, if you want. And we'll get to the phone calls, because I'm getting several comments here on Facebook right now. Well, if you don't want to be locked in solitary confinement, don't do the crime, you know. You know, they just are, you know, upset because they can't coddle them. If you just don't want to have any sympathy for the children, period, alone, as I was trying to say, maybe you can hit on this. If you're a citizen out living in the free world, why it's probably a good idea, even if you don't give a crap about these kids, okay, right, but that you are concerned about what happens when they're ultimately, unlike some adult offenders who are locked up for decades, they're going to get out, maybe in a matter of a year or two. Would you not rather have them be a little more stable? Is that right? So? What is the effect for, you know, them getting out? Where is that concerned? Aside from the torture and whether it's right or wrong, what happens to them when they get out?
So if they are not rehabilitated, if these juveniles do not receive appropriate treatment and medical care, education, they are going to come out of that facility in a worse state than they went in. They are likely to be more psychologically unstable. They are likely to have greater problems conforming to laws and society's expectations than they did when they went in. So what benefit is it to put them in there at all if this is how they're going to be treated?
Okay. These are kids that face a whole bunch of problems. And if this is how we deal with them, it can mean even more problems. The 16-year-old that we're quoting, okay, we're not identifying the 16-year-old. The 16-year-old who was in his cell for 23, then 24 hours a day, he went into DCS custody, according to the records and what we've learned, because he was protecting his mom from an abusive boyfriend. He pulled a gun on the abusive boyfriend in that situation. So he didn't, it's not murder, but it's bad. He used a gun. But then look at that. I mean, Davidson County said this was a meek, mild kid, and then he goes into this situation. Think of the hurt that's part of that disastrous sort of family situation, and then to be put in a situation where you're in a cell for 23, 24 hours a day, it's only making things worse. These kids will come out. They will be back on the streets, and it's in all of our best interest for them to go in and get some sort of help.
Yeah, or at the very least not be locked up for 23 hours a day, which is going to make things worse. That's right. Need people to get past their anger. I get angry too when I see the juvenile crime we've seen, and there's a lot of anger out there and frustration. Just lock them up for that. But you need to acknowledge and step back and say, look, as angry as I am, these kids under whatever they're charged are going to be coming out. Right. Not decades from now, but in a couple of months maybe, and it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that they have some help so they maybe don't recommit or come out worse than they were before, which is a public safety issue. Let's take a call from Joe. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe.
Good morning.
Morning.
Nick and your guest. I'm a little bit confused about this subject because you had a week or more of Phil Williams telling about they didn't, when they got caught doing anything, stealing a car or whatever, they'd be home before the paperwork got done on them. They turned them right back loose and go out on the street.
That's an excellent point. And Joe, I'm really glad you brought this up, because Phil and I were talking about this yesterday. Great point, Joe. So in a lot of cases, the revolving doors. Maybe you can explain how it is that some of these juveniles ultimately get up into this facility in Murray County, because the fact is an awful lot of them are arrested for car theft and they're out 2 hours later.
I think what Phil looked at, one of the things he looked at was car theft, and that's a whole issue where I think they don't even consider that something.
It's a property crime.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is something that needs to be looked at. What we're talking about here are kids that actually go into the system, go into DCS custody. So in the case of this 16-year-old, he pulled a gun on an abusive boyfriend, and so he goes into custody. At that point, so there's this universe of kids, I guess, who are stealing cars that never go into DCS custody. There's this other universe of kids who do go into DCS custody, who desperately need help. And what we are hearing from Davidson County and from other experts is that once they are in DCS state custody in need of some sort of counseling and services, what they're getting is this, and that's what we need to be concerned about, because they will eventually get back out on the street. And I do understand what Joe is saying. There are problems where some kids, with these car crimes especially, it's a revolving door. But what we're talking about is the kids that actually go into the system.
And they go into the system because?
It would be some sort of, crime.
A violent crime?
I can address that. So if a child is a repeated violator and has multiple offenses, violations of probation, violations of valid court orders, that child will eventually end up in DCS custody. But the first time a juvenile commits an offense that's a property offense, that's simply not detainable under Tennessee law. So that's one facet of the caller's concern there. And so what we're dealing with could be very serious violent offenders, or it could be just repeated minor or property crime offenders that ultimately end up in custody.
Okay. Did we need to take a break, a quick break? Okay, yeah, we do. Take a quick break. When we come back, Ann, Tom, and others on the line, stay there, and we'll address more of your comments that are coming in right now on Facebook at newschannel5.com right after this. Stay with us.